Welcome to the video lesson 11, My Elder Brother of Secondary Level English. Learners, after completing this lesson, you will be able to analyze the behavior and attitude of the two characters in the story, explain the interpersonal relationships between the siblings, recognize the importance of forgiveness in relationships and inculcate it in daily behavior, identify noun clauses and their different functions, and record significant experiences in a diary or a learning journal. Learners, in relationships, lots of things happen. We can have relationships between two siblings, two friends, two cousins, and with parents. Sometimes relationships are put to test when one person does something wrong and the other gets offended. Have you experienced something like that in your life? Well, there are times when so much anger and heat is generated that the two may stop talking to each other for some time. Time is the best healer, and silence sometimes gives us time to meditate and mull over the matter, and leads to the moment of enlightenment when either both or one realizes that relationships are more important than the trivia. Anger can sometimes blind us to such an understanding. Similarly, ego can prevent us from patching up by saying sorry. When either anger or ego is softened and substituted by true understanding, healing happens and relationships can revert to the same old pattern. Learners, coming to the gist of the story, My Elder Brother. This is a story of two brothers, Volodya and Nicky. They were almost of the same age group. They had just 1 year difference between them. Nicky was the younger one. Being about the same age group, they would often play together. There were moments when they would fight too, but Volodya invariably forgave. Both loved each other. Nicky nursed his ego for a long time sometimes. Even if he made the mistake and knew he should apologize, his ego would not let him say sorry. But Volodya's maturity and forgiving nature would bring back the peace between them. Let us read the story to find out what Nicky did one day to annoy Volodya, and after some time the matter was resolved. Learners, let us discuss the story in parts. You may read from the lines, I was only a year, 2 could not do likewise. That is, read 11.2 of the story. This is a story about two brothers, Nicky and Volodya. The story is narrated by Nicky. That is why it is told in first person. Nicky was 1 year younger than Volodya. They generally got along very well and would often play together and study together. There was no distinction made between them, but sometimes later Nicky began to nurse some ideas about his being inferior to Volodya in many ways. He began to discover how they were different from each other. He began to discover from some inferiority complex. He thought he has no match to Volodya in age, interests, and ability. Volodya was slightly better in studies than Nicky, and Nicky felt rightly and wrongly that perhaps Volodya knew that and was rather proud about that. Nicky himself confessed that his idea could have been totally wrong, but it developed more out of his own sense of pride and arrogance, which in other words is called vanity. And this would surface whenever he was face to face with him. Volodya, according to Nicky, was better than him at everything, lessons, in arguments, in manners, etc. This realization began to sow feelings of anger and jealousy, and the roots went deeper and deeper in Nicky's heart. They created some kind of ill feelings of jealousy in him. He confesses that these ideas started pulling him away from his brother, making a dent in their love for each other, and the relationship began to suffer. By nursing such feelings, Nicky began to get more confused. He began to suffer from moral anguish or mental torture, which he himself could not understand. One day, Volodya was given a tucked linen shirt. This made Nicky unhappy. He started comparing. Why should he be given a tucked-in shirt? He was unhappy that he was not given a similar shirt. Why the difference? Having got the tucked-in shirt, Volodya was very happy, and each time he wore a shirt and settled the collar in style. Nicky felt that he was trying to show off his superiority and was doing it on the purpose to mock at him. According to Nicky's self-confession, the thought that troubled him most was that he felt that Volodya probably could read Nicky's mind well. He would understand what was going on in Nicky's mind and that he was deliberately pretending not to know or understand him. Nikki then analyzes his feelings and says maybe these impressions that he formed about Volodya may not be true at all. Then what made him think so? It was probably due to his oversensitivity, which gave rise to imagination and thus deceived him. He then analyzes Volodya and says maybe he did not feel the way Nikki portrayed him. It was just that Volodya was a bit impulsive and indulged in some activities or hobbies which did not last long. What makes Nikki say that Volodya's interests were varied but none lasted long? He would notice that Volodya had shifting tastes. One day he could be collecting pictures for which he could be so passionate that he would then spend all his money on buying them and then did not even hesitate to beg them of his drawing teacher, parents or grandmother too. Next time his interests were different. He would now be crazy to decorate his table and then he would go round collecting them from every room in the house. And yet later he could see him develop a craze for novels. These he would obtain at the sly and spend his whole day reading them. Nikki says he could not help getting impressed seeing all the varied interests Volodya had and secretly wished he too could be like them. What stopped him from following his brother's footsteps? He gives two reasons for not doing so. First, he admits his own ego and false sense of pride and arrogance did not allow him to do so. Second, he justifies rightly or wrongly that he being young was not independent enough to choose a hobby. Now here one might question whether hobbies are selected by an individual himself based on his own likes or that he needs someone to give him ideas on what he should take up. This was one big false notion that Nikki had built up in his mind and this was a silly justification. However, Nikki goes on to admit that Volodya was a terrible large-hearted person too. This would get reflected when the two quarreled with each other. At such time, it was always Volodya who behaved well and Nikki, despite his wanting to be like his brother, could not bring himself around to behave like him. What was the behavior which Nikki was concerned about? Probably, Volodya would not stoop down to extreme pettiness or he may be treating such quarrels as petty and so did not want to carry on too long and that he was considerate and did not nurse any ill will for too long and forgave his brother. In this part of the story, we see how sometimes negative feelings can make us drift apart just because a person suffering from some kind of a complex or jealousy makes a mountain out of a molehill. His oversensitivity may give rise to imaginary thoughts, all negative, about the other person. Learners, we need to cultivate sensibility more than sensitivity. An oversensitive person may harm not just relationships but his own personality too. Another issue which this part of the story brings out is that a weaker personality often suffers from envy and despite an inner reverence for a person finds it hard to admit it openly. Also, a person suffering from inferiority complex tries to find an excuse for not being able to do things or take decisions. His urge to behave like his brother is also thwarted by his own ego. Had he been able to control his arrogance and ego, there was no reason why he could not do things Volodya did or behave like him. Learners, let us read part 11.2.2 of the story. Read from the lines, once, when, 2, we have quarreled for good. Learners, in this section, we are going to read about an incident and how the two brothers handled it. Nikki narrates the incident by telling us what happened during the time Volodya was going through his period of obsession with ornaments. His passion for collecting curios was at its height. You will understand what happens when one is totally obsessed with an idea. He is so much in love with his ideas and even a very patient man may see his temper flying and intolerance levels touching sky high when anyone tries to intercept or seems to endanger his passion in any way. One day, Nikki went up to his table and accidentally broke one of his colored scent bottle. When Volodya came into the room and saw all his arrangements in disordered way, he was angry. He then realized that the scent bottle was missing. He looked at Nikki and immediately knew who was the culprit. He almost accused Nikki of having done something to the scent bottle. He angrily asked him with whose permission he had touched his things. Nicky confessed that the bottle broke when he knocked it over by mistake. Volodya, still not able to control his anger, told him not to touch his things in future and sat down to rearrange the broken pieces of flask together and rearranging the table. Nicky's ego surfaced again. He did not like his brother ordering him and telling him what to do and what not to do. So he too retorted back, angrily saying, "And you please don't issue orders, that's all." After having said so, Nicky says he gave a smile even though he did not want to smile. What was the smile indicative of? It was Nicky's way of proving to himself that he too could dominate. It was more of a sarcastic smile. Volodya, who had still not able to overcome the sense of loss and that someone had disarranged his setting, said to Nicky that whilst this may appear to him as though nothing had happened and so it probably does not matter to him, he said that it did matter to him. While saying so, he jerked his shoulder the way his father jerked and then muttered to himself in a sore mood. He goes and breaks it and then laughs, the nasty little brat. Nicky heard the comment and flared up in anger again. He wanted to hurt him somehow, so he retorted by saying, "I'm a little brat and you are a big, but you are stupid." So that was the reply, learners. Volodya told him that he did not want to get into any argument with him and asked him to go away, giving him a light push. Then Nicky ordered him not to push. Volodya also got angry and again reminded him to go away. Nicky reiterated, "Don't push." But Volodya was really angry. He took Nicky by the arm and dragged him away from the table. This was too much for Nicky to bear. He was beside himself now, meaning he was furious. In his anger, he held the leg of the table and tipped it over. All things came tumbling down and crashed onto the floor. As though meaning to hurt him more and satisfying his own ego with some sense of vengeance and sadistic pleasure, he exclaimed with a sense of victory, "There, now." Volodya tried to save some of the fallen curious by reaching out to them on time, calling him a disgusting fellow out of a sense of irritation. Nicky retreated from the room, thinking it was all over between them, meaning thereby that the way tempers were flying high, he felt there could be no way for a patch-up and perhaps the two would live the rest of their lives as sworn enemies and would never have anything to do with each other. On the same lines of thought, he muttered to himself that they had probably quarreled for good. For good here could imply two things. He may have meant forever. He could also have meant it happened for good, so that both could live in peace if there was no fight. What do you think of this incident? You will agree that it was a trivial issue, but for children, little things carry a lot of meaning. If one is passionate about something, he does not want his world of pleasure to be broken into. Volodya was passionate about his collection and the way he had arranged his little curious goes on to tell us how he valued them. Nicky may have gone to the table just to see something, not realizing he would upset the whole arrangement and perhaps cause a breakage to some fragile items made of glass or china. He confessed that it was a mistake, but did not feel sorry. Learners, Volodya was out of his mind because he could not bear to see his precious collection getting damaged. Nicky behaves in the most nasty manner when he held on to the leg of the table and tipped it over, thus bringing all the items come crushing down. The ego would not let him humble down or feel really sorry. This is a complex psychology with kids who are incapable of doing anything themselves, and though they secretly admire others who do constructive things, they are not able to show it in their behavior. Their arrogance makes them behave worse than ever. Nicky thought, and perhaps all over, between the two brothers. Was he right in thinking so? No, he was not right. A fight between two siblings, very close in age, is a common sight, but this does not diminish or lessen their love for each other. Sooner or later, after they have retreated into their personal spaces and tempers have cooled down, there is a longing to be together again. Now learners, let us read the third part of the story to see if any reconciliation took place, and if yes, then how. Learners, read 11.3 part 3 on your own. You may read from the lines as soon as to tears in my eyes. True to his words, the two brothers finished their afternoon lessons and Nicky quickly left the room. He says that he was too scared, uncomfortable and ashamed to be alone with Volodya. Learners, let us understand Nicky's mind from these three words that he used for himself. Why was he scared? He was scared because Volodya was extremely angry and he felt that his anger may not have cooled down till now. He feared another volley of angry words or physical lashing. Why was he uncomfortable? He was uncomfortable because of a mixed feeling of fear and guilt. Why was he ashamed? He was ashamed of himself because of what he had done. He had broken his precious collection, and instead of apologizing, he was being arrogant, which was a mean act. As soon as the history lesson was over, Nicky pretended to take his exercise book and started going towards the door in order to leave the room. When he passed by Volodya, his heart wanted to go to him and say sorry, but his egoistic head did not allow him to do so. On the contrary, he gave him a dirty look. He scowled and put on an angry expression. At that moment, Volodya looked up and looked straight into his face with a smile. At their eyes met Nicky, and Nicky knew that Volodya had sensed the turmoil in his mind. Even then, some feeling which would not let him bend, as though he wanted peace on his own terms. Nicky ran out of the room. Volodya called out his name in the most natural way, without any emotion of anger or love. It was just the way it used to be each day. And then, like a true elder brother, he told him not to be angry with him anymore. Instead of demanding forgiveness, he asked to be forgiven. He said, "Forgive me if I have offended you." Saying so, he held out his hand to embrace his younger brother. Nicky felt choked with emotions as the suppressed feelings wanted to come out and satiate themselves. In his words, something that came higher and higher seemed to be pressing my chest and stopping my breath, in his own words. This is exactly what people feel when they have suppressed feelings for too long and are anxious to vent them out, but their ego does not allow them to do so. But as soon as this happened, tears started trickling down. That said it all, and the heavy burden of guilt was over with. Seeing his brother's greatness, he too realized the power that lies behind the words, "Forgive me." Words came out with difficulty because he was too choked with emotions, but he stammered and clasped his hands tightly. Volodya looked at him in a way as to ask him why he should be crying at all. We see Volodya a much more balanced, mature and intelligent person. He behaved like a true elder brother, always so loving and so concerned. Learners, now that we have understood the last part of the story, we get our answers to the question how siblings love brings them together. The bitterness of feeling which one nurses are cured by love and understanding. Learners, I hope you understand this part of the story. Now coming to the summary of the story. The story is told in the first person narrative, and that too in the voice of Nicky, the younger brother who is the narrator. Volodya and Nicky are two brothers with just 1 year gap. They are treated equally because of this narrow age difference. Both love, fight and play together. Despite all this, there is a vast difference in their character and personality. Volodya is quite mature for his age. He has a number of hobbies and interests and passionately pursues them. Nicky, on the other hand, is full of complexes. He is not capable of taking independent decisions, even to choose a hobby. He feels someone should help him decide. He envies his brother's qualities, secretly admires them and wishes he too were like him, but is egoistic and arrogant. He suffers from inferiority complex too. As a result, he overreacts to all situations and tries to dominate each difference with anger and irritation. Somewhere, he takes advantage of his brother's large-heartedness and his forgiving nature. One day, he is tempted to see the new arrangement of cuirass which Volodya had been lovingly arranged. He knocks off a glass center table by mistake also. Volodya enters the room and finding his table in a disarray and one bottle missing, guesses that this is the handiwork of his younger brother. He demands to know why he touched his things without his permission. Though initially Nicky confessed that the bottle broke by mistake, he could not bear to be on the back foot. His ego soon took the better of him, and he was back answering his brother. A minor scuffle took place, and Nicky walked out of the room, back mouthing him. By evening, they had enough time to ponder over the day's quarrel. Time acted as the best healer. Volodya was quick to return to normal mood, but Nicky continued to brood. After the evening lessons were over, Nicky picked up his exercise book and started to walk out. Just then Volodya called him, looked squarely in his face and apologized for his behavior. He then held out his hands to embrace him in a very forgiving gesture. Secretly, Nicky was also waiting for this moment of reconciliation. He realized how his brother readily apologized for his behavior when he had every right to be angry. He felt choked with the mixed feeling of guilt and ego and felt the burden of carrying it too long. Tears came trickling down, and he readily clung to his brother and asked for forgiveness. Volodya was much more controlled. He did not have to make a show of his emotions. What do we learn from this story, learners? It is a short story told by a young boy. In telling the story of two younger brothers, the author has very simplistically portrayed a complex human psychology. Learners, here there are some points to consider. Number one, it is natural for siblings to fight over trivial issues, and though the fight appears to be intense, it is soon forgotten. Number two, Volodya is the older brother who, despite his young age, shows adequate maturity. Number three, he had a wide range of interests and pursues them passionately, even if he has to beg people to help him add to his collection. Number four, he is intelligent and sensible and does not give in to emotions so easily. Except for one odd incident where he lost his cool, he can by and large maintain his cool and appear natural. Number six, Nicky on the other hand is impulsive, curious, not independent. Number seven, he is highly sensitive, egoistic and full of arrogance. Number eight, he demands attention, is jealous of this brother who appears to be so supreme to him. Number nine, he secretly admires him and wants to be like him, but his ego comes in way each time. Number 10, even when he is wrong, he does not have the humility to ask for forgiveness. On the contrary, he loves to see his opponent given to his haughtiness. Learners, finally we learn the power of forgiveness. Volodya has no hesitation in asking for forgiveness from his younger brother, simply because he realized that as an older brother, he ought not to have treated his brother the way he did. There is a complete catharsis when seeing his humility. Nicky too breaks down and asks for apology. Another important lesson we learn is that we should have self-confidence and not let our ego take the better side of us. When in anger, it is better to retreat from the scene for a while to take into account the other person's perspective. When we do this, we can reconcile differences easily. Learners, let's come to the grammar section of the story, and it's there in the lesson itself. Kindly look up the book. Coming to noun clauses, in lesson 7 you learned about clauses. However, let us refresh our memory with a short revision. A sentence with a subject and finite verb makes full sense and can be called a clause. A simple sentence with one subject and one finite verb makes a simple sentence. In complex sentences, there is one principal clause which can stand independently and make sense, but it may have one or more than one finite verb and a group of words which make sense but not complete sense and hence cannot stand independently. These are dependent on the main or principal clause for their meaning. There are three types of clauses: noun clause, adjective clause and adverb clause. Just as the words indicate the three function in a sentence in the same way as a noun, adjective or an adverb behave. Learners, let us practice a few sentences. He was better than me. I began to realize that I was no comparison to him, or I was no companion to him. In the above sentence or the sentence which I told you. The first sentence is a simple sentence because it has one subject and one finite verb. He was better than me. I began to realize that I was no companion to him. Now, in these sentences, the first sentence is a simple sentence because it has one subject and one finite verb. He is the subject and was is the verb. In the second sentence, we notice that I is the subject, began is the finite verb, that is linker, I is second subject. It may or may not occur in this way every time. Was is second finite verb. Now, let us see if we can break this sentence in two parts. I began to realize, next, I was no companion to him. These two are connected with a linker, that. If we ask the question what he realized, then the second part answers the question, that he was no companion to him. So, we can say that a clause is a group of words which has a subject and a predicate with a finite verb of its own. In a complex sentence, there are more than one finite verbs, but the entire lesson or the entire sentence has one principal clause. All other clauses are dependent clauses. Let us do an exercise with simple sentence. He is reading a novel. The sentence is, he is reading a novel. He is the subject and is reading a novel is the predicate, beginning with a finite verb is. Number 2, my mother teaches English. My mother is the subject and teaches English is the predicate. The finite verb over here is teaches. Learners, now let us analyze a few complex sentences. It is very simple over here to understand. Sentence number 1, it even seems to me that Volodya himself was aware of his superiority. Here, in the first part of the sentence, it is the main subject. Seems to me is the predicate. In the second part, Volodya is the subject and was aware of his superiority is the predicate. The finite verb over here is was. Both are connected by a linker called that. Number 2, I am sure that I would have felt happier. I is the main subject, am is the verb and am sure is the predicate. In the next half again, I is the subject, would have is the verb and would have felt happier is the predicate. The connecting link word is again that. Learners, let us now look at some independent clauses and dependent clauses. Number 1, Nikki realized that he was jealous of Volodya. Nikki is subject, realized is finite verb, he is the second subject, was is the finite verb, was jealous of Volodya is predicate. Now, if we were to read the parts, these two parts without the linker, they would be read like this. Nikki realized he was jealous of Volodya. The second part of the sentence answers the question, what did he realize? Learners, now try to work out the exercises given in your book on your own. Learners, let's come to the very important part of the lesson, that is how to write a diary. It's very important and I think you will be able to understand how to write a diary by this. Learners, diary is a kind of personal document. It records an individual's account of a day of his or her life. We grow through our experiences. A diary or a learning journal is a good tool to record our own experiences. It can bring back many memories, happy or sad, at a later point in time. It can also help us to realize how our experiences shape our personality over a period of time. We could encourage you also to keep a diary or learning journal to record your own experience. Writing a diary is very easy. There are no hard rules you have to follow and you can simply write whatever comes to your mind. But over the years, we have experienced what kind of diaries that engages its owners and makes them a helpful, interesting asset in their lives. Learners, try to remember that there are no rules for diary writing. If you are somebody who keeps a written diary about your recent life and the changes that have occurred, then you may be acutely aware of just how difficult it can be at times to actually make a quality diary post. It can take a considerable amount of time and you don't even want to write. I'll just tell you certain important steps to write your diary so that it comes very simply to you. Number one, learners, try to be honest when you write your diary. When you're writing a diary entry, give the full story of your opinions, thoughts and fears. Open up and let your feelings pour onto the page. Holding back helps nobody. Be detailed. Think of it like a book. Is it better when the description goes on and on? Picking the most significant details and adding them is the most important thing which you can write in your diary. You should also have a spell check. If you are writing this, then you need to go through for entries to find poor grammar, punctuation and spelling. Even the most diligent of minds will mess up every now and then. So look out for all the errors and crop the unnecessary details. Dates now. Remember the date. It's a good idea to always include the date when you write an entry. Note. Try to note this, that this is not the same as the date for the event or experience you are writing about. Number 5, giving your entry a title. It's easier, learners, to scan through your notes later if you include a short and descriptive subject for your daily entries. Number 6, write short stories. Most people, learners, start out by writing long diary entries, even many pages containing thousands of characters. Now, some final diary writing tips. Any habit will be difficult to start and maintain if it's hard to do. You have to start it and keep up with it. When you are writing in your journal, it's important just write whatever you feel like without worrying about who might be reading. Journal entries are like letter to your future self, and reading back on your past is always a great experience. You might not realize how important they were until later on. Coming to the format, simple format, you can have it top left, date, day and time. Next, the tense most frequently used, simple past tense, present perfect and future. Number 3, first person application or first person narrative. Steps: begin the entry with general sentence describing the day or momentary feelings. Number 2, in the body you may discuss an event, your feelings towards it, how it is likely to affect your future plans. Number 3, conclude with final remark and future course of action. Recall an incident when you helped someone. Learners, over here, try to recall an incident when you helped someone. Record your feelings in your diary, journal in about 100 words. Try to do this, learners. This is an exercise and you can look up your book also. I hope you understand some of the important issues and you were able to interpret some of the important bonding points and issues raised in the story. Learners, prepare well for your exams. Goodbye, best of luck and thanks.